The purposes of spirit releasement therapy are various. We work to discover unsuspected roots of mental and physical illness. The source of these illnesses may include current life traumas or past life traumas, but they can also be caused by possession or attachment by earthbound spirits, possession or attachment by demonic entities, soul fragmentation, soul loss, and even possession by non-human entities. An earthbound entity is a human spirit who did not transition to the light after the death of their physical body. The light is the energy which comes at the time of death. Earthbound spirits, which are the surviving consciousness of humans who have died, are the most common type of entity that attaches itself to human living beings. People who have had near-death experiences describe widely differing scenarios. Some do see the light at the time of death and see relatives or people that they have known who have passed over. I had a friend who passed over a few years ago who was a Vietnam veteran. Only one time in all of the years that I knew him and was close to him did he ever speak about his experiences in Vietnam. And the occasion that prompted him to do so was because a former student had come back to visit me and tell me about his horrifying experiences in the war in Iraq. And I was telling my friend Steve about this, and then he started telling me about what happened to him. He told me that as a 19-year-old man who was drafted to Vietnam, during his first few weeks serving there, he saw a friend get blown up right in front of him one day when they were out on patrol duty. And the guy, Smitty, stepped on some kind of a booby-trapped explosive device, and he was blown to bits right in front of Steve. Steve told me how he had to walk through the jungle and pick up the pieces of Smitty to bring back to camp. It was a horrifying experience, and even when he was telling me all those years later, when he was in his 60s, he clearly was still very shattered by the experience. Anyway, when he died a few years ago, he came to me in spirit the day he passed over, and one of the first things he said to me was, "I saw Smitty, and he was all in one piece again." I also had a student that passed over a number of years ago who was wheelchair bound for all of his life that I knew him. And when he passed over and I did a reading for his family, he was no longer in a wheelchair. He was in full control of all of his limbs, and he was running through a field. Some people, however, perceive a rather hellish scene when they pass over. They wander about in the lower astral plane where dark energy beings, demonic entities, and lost earthbound discarnates linger. Some of these spirits actively look for unsuspecting and naive persons to attach to for their own selfish purposes. Some spirits are very confused at the time of their death. We don't do a very good job for the most part in the Western world preparing ourselves for the death experience. We spend most of our time trying not to think about it because we fear it. And I have done many readings for souls that were confused after they left their physical bodies, especially if the death was due to a violent act or suicide. And they will keep asking me, "Am I dead? Am I dead?" They are arrested on the timelessness of the spirit realm, perpetually re-experiencing the mental, emotional, and physical trauma of their death. They are driven by the memories, needs, desires, appetites, and emotions at the ego level of their being, and will continue to try to interact with living souls in order to pursue these needs. Because of this, these souls remain on the earth plane as a disembodied soul or entity. They are also known as discarnate beings or spirits, and in the Jewish Orthodox tradition, they are called daibak. These entities are often revealed when an individual is under hypnosis. They can be communicated with through a medium if necessary. During this communication, the hypnotherapist will try to find out who they are, why they did not transition into the light, what attracted them to a particular being or person, how they were able to enter that person's physical vehicle in the energy field surrounding it, and what effect they had on the host person. These earthbound spirits have gender and a name. They are at the age when they died. The present date for them is the date of their death. If they are able to recognize that they have died, Some of these spirits are confused about that too, though, as I said. And earthbound entities can express human emotions, and they also influence the emotional state of their host. This means that they bring their emotional baggage with them, and this can be very traumatic on the energy field of the host because this is like a mental residue that lingers. This can cause the host person to experience a great amount of distress and anguish. I had another student a number of years ago whose mother had passed away when she was very young, 10 years old. And this girl was always very slumped over. She was very depressed. She was very sad. And one day I contacted her higher self, and the higher self told me that her mother was trying to protect her by remaining attached to the girl. And this is, in fact, what was dragging the girl down and what was suppressing her energy field. And so what I did was I communicated with the mother, and I explained to her that she wasn't really helping the girl by hanging around her, that we would take care of the girl and make sure that she would be okay and that she could release and she could move on, which she subsequently did. And that young lady did contact me a number of years after she graduated, and she is much, much better. In addition to imposing mental stress on the host, an earthbound entity can also bring with it the physical symptoms of any illness that it suffered in life. This includes physical impairment and addictions to alcohol, drugs, and food. The entities are aware that they are attached to the physical body of the host and that it does not belong to them. And so one of the things that I tell people when they start to become aware that they have these attachments is that they have every right to tell whatever it is that is trying to attach itself to them to get out, because their body doesn't belong to the entity and the entity has no right to claim it. And that sometimes is very, very effective and very helpful. The entities may have served a useful purpose to the host at one point, such as in the case I discussed in another video about the woman who suffered from ritual abuse and grieved the loss of the little girl that was released from her. That little girl provided the woman with a sense of childlike innocence that helped her to cope with her daily life. And this is why she said she was not willing to let go of any of the other entities that were within her at that time. They obviously served some purpose for her. Earthbound entities don't sleep, and they have no concept of time. They do have memories of events, however, and they feed off the energy of the host. And the most prevalent effect of this is a kind of chronic or mild fatigue. This can also lead to the host feeling invaded and violated, but not understanding the reason for these feelings. A sudden change in the personality, especially after events such as surgery, trauma, grief, loss of a loved one, use of mind-altering drugs, or combat may signal the presence of a newly attached earthbound entity. Similarly, if a person suddenly acquires some new skill that they never had before, this might signal an attachment. And I'd like to say something very briefly about the use of mind-altering drugs. These are very dangerous to experiment with because they can create large gaping holes in a person's energy field. And this is a prime area of attachment for these entities that are seeking to come in. So I would really caution the use of mind-altering drugs and opening that kind of creating that kind of an opening in your energy field. An entity usually has complete memory of its activities and where it came from before finding the host, after finding the host, and after its attachment to the host. It might attach to a person for the first time, or the attachment could be reestablished lifetime after lifetime. In any case, the entity knows why it is attached to the person and knows what past life connections it had, if any, to the person. Interestingly, however, in about half the cases of spirit attachment, there's no connection in the present or any other lifetime, and the attachment appears to be very random. That's why we want to make sure that we have good psychic hygiene and that we keep our energy fields and our chakras clear, because we don't want to give any of these entities the ability to attach to us. When the entity comes in without being invited by the host, clearly that's a violation of free will. Another reason why we want to be careful about doing things like playing with Ouija boards is because we don't know who we're communicating with if we haven't protected ourselves, and we're just giving an in to some of these earthbound spirits who are just waiting to attach to someone. There's no limit to the number of disembodied entities that can attach to a living person. There might be very many of them, and they can even be attached in groups to a person. In addition to this, an earthbound spirit can have another entity attached to it, the earthbound spirit. It appears there is no limit to the number of attachments a person can be carrying around, especially in the case of severe trauma such as ritual abuse, where the mind is shattered completely. It is quite likely that many, many entities will be found during differential diagnosis of a client. The entity is aware of its motive for attaching to a person, and there might be no harmful intent. However, attachment is ultimately not helpful, and it is a violation of free will. Sometimes the intent is not benevolent, and in some cases an entity might be seeking revenge or retribution. In cases like these, the intention is to cause harm in any way possible. And this is usually seen when the death has taken place as a result of murder or perhaps a battlefield killing. People who die in the throes of drug and alcohol addiction sometimes do not move on to the light, but hang around looking for others who have the same addiction. By attaching to people with similar issues, the earthbound entity continue to pursue alcohol and drug abuse. Sometimes an entity attachment is caused by grief over the loss of a loved one and a desire to stay close to a mate. This is why it is important when someone is dying to let them know that it is okay to pass over to the other side. Trying to hold on too tightly can cause guilt and hinder a deceased loved one from moving into the light. Another reason why a spirit might remain earthbound is if it dies in the midst of a very vigorous and goal-directed life. It might seek to fulfill those goals through another person's body rather than make the transition to the other side. Or a spirit might be confused or terrified or even angry and looking for someone to blame. This might attract dark energy forces. An earthbound spirit can be fragmented, and the fragments of this entity can be attached to 2 or more living people simultaneously. A fragment can also be attached to another earthbound spirit. All of this information was gathered by various clinical professionals, including hypnotherapists, doctors, therapists, and psychiatrists, from dialogues with clients and sessions dealing with entities. It is clear when you read such accounts that the process of spirit releasement therapy is very complicated. There's no easy fix. However, in most cases, once a spirit understands that it is deceased and no longer attached to its body, and that there is a solution to the issue, usually it will agree to separate itself from the host and move on to the light. It is important to understand that sometimes the entities themselves require help and therapy in resolving their emotional turmoil before they move on. If this is not done, the entity might take the course of leaving one host and immediately searching for another. And so, in addition to healing the person who has the attachment, we want to prevent future attachments. When a spirit moves into the vibrational level called the middle astral, it can rest for as long as it wants to before pursuing the next step in its soul evolution. And many religious texts refer to this level as heaven.